Okay. Ooh, maybe I got the email. Thank you. That's a go. That's a go.
We're not judging you.
What's that?
You should drive.
I don't want to show off. And then somebody will feel bad, you know. Next, I have good news for all of you. Do you want to hear the good news? The test review list. There are asterisks on the ones that have short IDs. This is the last time I do this. If you want to believe it, that's fine. I don't know how many I have. So, asterisk for the test. And
Some of the ones you put asterisks the last time were options on the board test.
well, I said they could be. If you don't want the hint, I won't give you.
No, I want
Okay. So, and let's review this for the test. And so as I understand it, I think someone in here said that they were charging $100, and it appears as though they are charging $100 for the AP exam. And I don't know. I'm out of the loop. No one tells me anything. I've asked.
So if we go there with the $94 check, they're going to go.
Well, that's what, you know, maybe we shouldn't follow what the College Board says to pay for the College Board exam. And so I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm in the dark, and I've asked about 20 different people, and no one has responded to me. So, you don't want to talk to me. Yeah.
How many short IDs are on the test here?
Less than 20. I really can't remember how many I put on there. I think 5 again.
Okay, you already.
No, actually, no, I have part of it, but I'm tinkering with it. I tinker it. So, with that, everybody go ahead and we are a little behind here, so we gotta get going. So we take your notes out. We get through the difference between the parties. And which party was more urban? Which party was more rural? Urban was? And rural? Rural. And which one wanted more democracy? Which one was more? Which one was pro tariff? Which one was generally taller? That was Republican. Yeah. Jefferson was 7'8". Yeah. Then he went to 6'3" when he was president. He lost a few inches. He got his legs cut off right here. What? Well, I want to do it Friday, but we'll see if we get there. If not, we'll have to do it.
So you're signing more
Monday?
Do what Friday?
Tests.
Why?
Because when tests come, So with that, who warned against foreign entanglements in political parties?
Washington.
It's a little naive, but also there is a political dysfunction. In the election of 1796, who's this guy? Jefferson. Who's this guy? The vice president, Jefferson, or he was Washington's vice president? John Adams. That's John Adams. That's Thomas Jefferson. And they're running for president. Adams technically said he wasn't a Federalist, but he was the Federalist candidate. Jefferson was one of the founders of the Republican. And it was a nasty election because one of the quirks of the Electoral Congress, each elector had 2 votes. With the idea would be they'd vote for their first choice and vote for their second choice. The person with the most votes and the majority would be president. Second most vice president. Well, I think you might see what the problem is going to be. And also, this was a bitter election. Here it's trying to show Federalists supporting Washington's procession for American greatness. And here's Jefferson trying to pull the wheel back and stop the progress. They're trying to say more and more that he's this revolutionary who wants to bring the terror of the French Revolution. And here's Republicans, and they're calling the Federalists Tories. Tories were what kind of people in the Revolutionary? What were they called? They support the British. What's the name for them, though? Loyalists. So they're basically calling each other traitors. They jump right to your trees. Ironically, these were friends. They would kind of become friends at the end of their lives. But they were friends, and now they're bitter political enemies. And this nasty campaign would end in a nightmare. Adams won the Electoral College. But all the Federalist voters, they split, along with the Republican voters, split on the vice presidential choice. So Jefferson was number 2. Therefore, the president was Adams, and his political enemy was the vice president, Jefferson. It'd be like Trump being elected president and Hillary Clinton being the vice president. And this is a crisis. The leader of the opposition, and it's going to get really bitter, will be the vice president. Now, the vice president only breaks ties in the Senate, and waits for the president to die. But still, this crisis, and they begin to decide, what do we do? Madison still wanted to go to the House, but they realized this is going to blow up. They certainly didn't want a popular vote at all. Remember, they don't want, the founders, for the most part, are still pretty anti-democratic. But we have another election where that comes. It'll be the 12th. And so, while this is going on, what were Corsairs? Corsairs were whose pirates? Whose? Yeah. What about these French pirates? And what's going to be called the Xyz affair? The U.S. sent a couple diplomats, Monroe and Pinckney, I'm sorry. They went to France, and they wanted to speak to Foreign Minister Talleyrand. 4 French diplomats, they called them intermediaries. They said, we'll let you see Foreign Minister Talleyrand if you give us a loan. Another word for a loan is a what? They wanted a bribe. And they basically said to the United States, you can't see our foreign minister unless you pay us. Well, this was a big slap in the face. They're basically, the United States is weak and we don't care. But, this is supposed to be Talleyrand, the great survivor. He made it all the way through the monarchy, then the revolution, saved his head. All the way through Napoleon, pretty amazing guy. And after Napoleon. But this right here represents America. Yeah.
Why did they need to see?
To do something about the Corsairs that were stopping American ships. We're doing the same thing. That's what Jay's Treaty was about, trying to stop the blockade, which failed. Well, this is Lady Columbia. That was a symbol of the United States for most of the 19th century, into the 20th century. They draw Lady Columbia. Some people say she was Lady Liberty. No, that was the thing that came at the end of the century. Some people call the Americans Columbia after Columbus. And the feathers, they represent something. What? Liberty. Who represented liberty? Still, American Indians. Yeah. That's why there's feathers on there. And if you look up here, here's Uncle Sam. He'll come about in the War of 1812. But in World War I, this famous poster copying this famous British poster, we're kind of make Uncle Sam like more and more the symbol of the U.S. And Lady Columbia is going to be forgotten. But Adams was furious and decided, okay, we'll have to fight the Corsairs, protect our ships and fight the Corsairs. Well, it's not a full-fledged, like you would think, an all-out war, but there'll be a naval war on the high seas that we call the quasi-war. Quasi means partial, almost, and it's going to meet the Corsairs. And it's not a full-scale war, even though there would be a couple places where there'd be some fighting. For the most part, it would be capturing ships and taking prisoners. But this is another picture of the Xyz Crisis. Here are the American diplomats. And this is supposed to represent Talleyrand and the French intermediaries. And they make it like a Saracen. And the Ottoman Empire was seen as very corrupt. But that's what they made it seem like, a mystical. And this is supposed to represent the French Revolution. And these are people gambling with the French heads. By the way, they have someone of African descent there. we'll get to this tomorrow, but because of the slave rebellion in Haiti, that's going to have an incredible impact on the United States. And this is supposed to represent the French vision of liberty, their Lady Liberty. You notice how they draw her? Kind of like almost like a witch, and then what does she operate? Yeah, they just cut someone's head off. This is a pretty gruesome picture. You get right down to it. So it's implying that that's how evil the French were. And this was the this was a Federalist cartoon. And so the first thing is there was no Navy. So they created a cabinet level position like the Department of War, called the Department of Navy. So there'd be a War Department and a Navy Department all the way up to 1947. Then it'd be combined into the Defense Department. And they begin to build ships, not the big ships of the line like the battleships, but fast frigates like the Constitution, and this one is the Wasp, fighting a French ship right there. And they had to raise taxes to pay for these ships. Actually, they didn't build a lot of them, but they're really good ships, copying a French design. Fast, maneuverable, and they would also fight for the little tiny fleet would fight some one-on-one battles against the British fleet in World War II, which is quite a shock. No, in the War of 1812, and so many cannonballs bounced off the Constitution. It's going to be called Old Ironsides, even though that's wooden hulls, oaken hulls. But the Constitution right there, it's still in the U.S. Navy today. It has a U.S. Navy crew. If you go to Boston, it's in Boston Harbor. You can go tour it, and your tour guide is a petty officer, chief petty officer, which is like a sergeant, a non-commissioned officer in the U.S. Navy. Now, a whole Navy crew, a former student of mine, this is like 15 years ago, but he was one of those crewmen. And he said it was awesome for about 8 months, and then he just got tired of the tourists. Too many tourists coming in. But yeah, still in the Navy, still a commissioned ship. There's also like the Constellation, one of these ships is in Baltimore. It's, okay, I find this stuff really cool, so, but you or not, did you go to it?
Yeah, I've been to the Constitution.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
If you go to Boston, I would highly recommend it. And it's tiny. You're inside these little rooms. I'm a little claustrophobic. I don't know how those guys did it. I know what you're thinking. Well, I'm seemingly invulnerable, but yeah, I actually don't like, but it's still in the Navy today, commissioned. So for example, 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, for reasons that are interesting, but the US invaded Iraq, that ship from 1798, they had in the Persian Gulf, and it shelled the shores of Iraq, because we had our fleet there. And so with that, this naval battle, anybody find that? I got a few people to write that down. Our ships from 1798. There's two reasons why that's not true. It has smoothbore cannon. No, we're not using that. And secondly, there are no shores of Iraq. It's not on the ocean. Okay, so how many people were like, you have to admit, like, could be.
Definitely a little bit.
All right, so here's the thing. By the way, remember what I told you it's good to know stuff? See, just get a straight face. Someone who kind of get your trust and they can make you believe anything. I would never abuse that notion. Let me tell you who you need to know. So there was no declaration of war, even though one of the things was the founders were really fearful that a corrupt leader would become a tyrant. Secondly, Republicans, in seeing this, were absolutely furious, not only because they're pro-French, but because their taxes are going up, and that's mostly on farmers. And also, they started calling the Federalists, this is where you get the Tories, the traitors, because if the United States goes into an unofficial war with the French, they're kind of at war then with whom? Or they're actually allied with whom?
British.
With the British, because we're fighting their enemy. So this would lead to a crisis because the Republicans are going to bitterly criticize the Federalists, and the Federalists have another problem. Not only do they have Republican opposition, and they know it, and it's kind of legit. Let me rephrase it. It's legit. The Federalists are only in this area here, and they can do the math. There's more people here, and there weren't like a wave of immigrants that will come like in the 1840s, but there's still immigrants, mostly from Britain, coming over. And they're moving in here. A lot of them want to be farmers in the West. And what party would they probably become? We're going to be outnumbered in the House. That means the Electoral College. And we better do something about this. So you combine that with, why are you opposing us when we're fighting a war? That would lead to 3 laws that we lump together as, oh no, we're jumping right here. The Alien and Sedition Acts. We lump them together because there's 2 laws about immigrants. Non-citizens are called aliens. They're the Greys. And where do the Greys live now? Circle, Montana. Has anyone ever been to Circle? You made it out? Barely. It's a tough one. You actually have been to Circle?
Yeah.
Okay, there's now 3 people in all my classes who've been to Circle. I don't know, 2 counting me, I guess. Why'd you go to Circle? Were you punished?
No,
No, I'm sorry, Circle. I love Circle.
we're going to Skokie one time.
Okay. Circle's in the north. I'll tell you about the Greys. I'll tell you some stories after the AP exam in May. Circle will be one. So, citizens, when they become a this may seem like a long ways away.
Yep. Yeah, but
It's actually like that. But to become a naturalized citizen, you have to live in the country for 5 years. They increase it to 14. They increase it to 14 years to become a citizen, to make it more difficult to become a citizen. Not only to push it down the road, but a significant number of immigrants that come to the United States go back home. It's usually between 1/3 and 40% go back home to this day. Next, they said they could deport dangerous, and that's how they spelled it in the law. I just think that's funny. Dangerous aliens like Citizen Guinea. And claiming that if you have people from France immigrating to the United States, they're going to try to brew discontent and revolution. But the thing was, that way you keep the voting numbers down and you can deport potential Republicans. And lastly, they said no sedition. Sedition is criticism of the government. And they said there can be no sedition. This is the actual sedition law. And it was done by scribes, so it had to be handwritten. And what they said is you cannot criticize the government because they claimed criticism of the government helps the French. So you can't criticize the government because we might lose the war. Well, this war is not declared, so that argument alone is pretty dubious. But at the same time, doesn't that seem to violate something? How can you have a republic, especially one where at least in the House of Representatives, you choose your representatives if you can't criticize the government? What amendment does that seem to, in the Constitution, what amendment does that seem to violate? The First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, press, assembly, and petition. And this seems to do it. Of course, the Federalists said, this is not free speech. The Republicans are starting revolution. And so that is where you get to this law. The Federalists claimed we're doing this to save the country. But who is it really targeting? What party? Make sure you get that down. This was a direct assault on the Republicans. This was to shut down political opposition. And everybody knew this. Adams actually didn't sign the Sedition Act. I'm sorry, Adams didn't want to sign the Sedition Act, but he thought it was constitutional, so he signed it. But by signing it, it became his law. And this was meant to make it more difficult to become Republicans, to demonize immigrants, because the Federalists knew they're going to be in the minority party. You see minority parties do this all the time. The Whigs would do it in the 1840s, the Know-Nothings in the 1850s. Yes, there was a party called the Know-Nothings. The Republicans in the 1920s. And you can see all the way up to this day, demonizing immigrants. And that's one of the ways to attack the other party. But also, sedition, this is specifically designed to shut down normal political talk by saying that criticism is traitorous language. Because sedition will be enforced by whom? Well, not just the federal court, specifically what person? Yeah, the executive branch. And it could be in the states too. They get to decide what sedition is. If I say no sedition, you cannot criticize the school, let's say. Define that. I mean, yeah, you said the school sucks. Okay, yeah, that's criticism, but can you think of? What if you say these hallways are too narrow? Isn't that criticism?
Well, the school specifically doesn't have emotions, so how do you criticize?
Always too narrow.
Or if you like say something about one teacher, they're not the school.
How do you
They
know?
could be part of, yeah,
How do you know?
you could consider you.
How do you know? Because you're right about that, but the government, when you're really criticizing individuals within it, you know, what if you just say, you know, I wish I had one more period a day to learn. Or one less period, are you criticizing the school? Couldn't it be anything? In 1798, oh, I don't want to pay my taxes, I don't have enough money. Oh, you're helping the French. What do most rational people who don't want, especially then, the vague punishment to happen for anything, what do? What would you do if anything you say could get you in trouble? Shut up. That's the plan. It shuts up only everybody except the most radical people. And then the people who still talk, you say, look how radical they are. I told you we should have shut them up. Now, they didn't arrest very many people. It didn't go as bad as it could in the future, but these kind of laws would happen all the time. And not just you think, oh, that's like what Nazi Germany did, which yes, they did, but also in the US. Yes.
Well, lots of countries still have sedition.
North
A lot.
Korea.
France. France is a weird country. Liberty, equality, fraternity is your slogan. At the same time, you have no rights. It's just a weird place. Great museums, like the Orsay. Let me get back to the Orsay. So, and crepes
Those are so good.
with European Nutella. Okay, moving on. So, have you had the difference? Have you had Nutella from Europe? It's like night and day.
It's like what?
Two different flavors.
Oh.
You get it here. No, I forgot. Now I'm hungry again. Oh, I got a whole bag. Not the same though. So, if you want to become a totalitarian dictator, what's the first thing you do?
Introduce food.
Go to war. Go to war. Or at least imply war is coming. So then you can say anybody who disagrees with you is a traitor helping the enemy. Then you can ban free speech. And then you give everybody a screen and pizza, and then you can control and do whatever you want. Yeah, I added the next part, but write that down when you become a dictator. And remember me. I'll be your sympathetically, no, I won't. But that's all on film, me teaching you how to be a dictator. But that's what they do. Nazi Germany, their enemy were the communists. And they said anybody who's criticized, they're communists. And the Soviet Union, their enemy, the fascists. They worked out pretty well together. So Jefferson and Madison were furious. They thought presidents could stop unconstitutional laws, and Adams didn't do it. So they would write documents that would be issued as a resolution in two states, in two state assemblies. Kentucky, that'd be written by Jefferson, Virginia, written by Madison. So the vice president and the speaker of the House. And they would deal with this constitutional crisis about unconstitutional laws. Because it doesn't say who'll deal with them, and the president clearly isn't going to, at least that's what they thought. So what they said is, the states could nullify or not obey unconstitutional laws. And so what Virginia and Kentucky said, if you don't repeal these laws, we won't enforce them in our borders. And they're trying to say that other states should do this too. It doesn't say in the Constitution, but since it's not clear anywhere about what to do about unconstitutional laws, and this would create a near disaster. Because if a state doesn't obey laws, and this is the one for Kentucky legislature, if they don't obey that law, a federal law, and the federal government lets them do it, then laws become optional. And some states will obey some, and some states will obey others, and what will happen to the government? It will lose power, and the country will collapse. But there's something else, too. By Jefferson and Madison putting this out here, they set the precedent for the future. This is a pamphlet from 1833, and what's called the Nullification Crisis of 1833, right here. And they have the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, and they're using this to justify, it was called, it was nullification under terror, but the whole thing was about protecting slavery. And they would use that as the justification to not obey federal laws to protect slavery. Jefferson and Madison opened up Pandora's box. By trying to stop this law, they gave kind of a philosophical backing. So the South could say, Jefferson wanted this, and he's one of the founding fathers. Because, let's get to the next step. Let's say the federal government says, you have to obey the law. Then the states can do what? What do you call leaving the Union? They could secede, and this would be used as justification. By the way, that's how you're supposed to secede. Everyone see that? It's not secede like success. It's secede. Secede. It's not a big deal, but it's spelling. And this is pretty scary. Now, fortunately, this was 1799 when they did this, and the war would end before Adams could call their bluff. Jefferson and Madison are bluffing. Basically, they're saying, we'll blow up the world unless you do what we want, and hoping they'll just do what we want. In 1833, President Andrew Jackson called South Carolina's bluff and saved the Union. It nearly had civil war, and the South would have won, without a doubt. 1850, it almost happened again. In 1861, the U.S. was lucky to survive.
Okay, who was the president in 1778?
That's still Adams. Because what happened is, before they could really come to crisis, the war would end. There'd be a convention in 1800, there'd be kind of peace, but that was partially because the French had kind of won that round of the wars. That's why when Napoleon was emerging, then he would go invade Egypt. That's another story for another time. This is another battle of the Watts with the Guerre. These are French prisoners in South Carolina. But the war ended, and now we have the election of 1800. And this election then would be a bitter, even more nasty. But it's a rematch. Who's this? That's Adams. And look how creepy those flags they made for him are. Jefferson. And then Adams just looks, remember what I told you, how they drew the paintings. And both sides. The Federalists called the Republicans dangerous radicals who want to bring the French Revolution to the U.S. The Republicans called the Federalists a bunch of monarchists who either want to bring back Britain or at least create a dictatorship. And when they're both essentially calling each other traitors, it's hard to go back. Ironically, once again, they were friends. Now, I got to show you one picture real quick of two paintings. Because portrait painting I always find fascinating. We get an idea what they look like. At Jefferson, that's a little closer to what he looked like. He was more of a redhead. But he was getting older, so he was getting a little gray. The thing is, portrait painters, that's their job. And so they have to be very complimentary to the people they're painting. So they got to try to make them look better so they get hired again. Do you get the point here? And I thought this is a good time to show you how difficult that would be. The only place we can really see that is to show you an example of monarchs. Let's go to a couple Habsburg monarchs from the 15th and 16th century. Well, actually, 16th and 17th. Charles V and Philip IV. Are you ready? And by the way, this is why cousins should not marry cousins. Oh. The recessive chin disease, or chin gene, was going through that family. Look at this. That's Charles V. Poor Philip couldn't even talk. He couldn't eat. His jaw was just much. That's why, in fact, maybe we should write this down. Don't marry your cousin.
That's like what they actually.
Yeah. That's their portrait. No.
That's better than what they actually.
Yeah, that's better than what they did. Because the portrait painter has to try to make them look better. Poor Philip. I mean, Philip was just a mess. But then again, that's why if anybody says, oh, the nobility of the monarchy, and talk about the royal family. No. Yeah. Of course, long hair was a style for men. But still, he was a sickly, poor guy, couldn't eat.
Oh my gosh.
That's why people say monarchies are good. No, this is why aristocracies are bad. Because you're stuck with whatever, well, inbred freak becomes your kid. Sorry, I don't like monarchs. Pretty good hands, though. Okay.
How long his fingers are.
I think that's the least.
So with that, this election will go to the, it's in the Electoral College, and they thought they had the whole crisis resolved. Aaron Burr, I'm sorry, let's get back here. Adams, and then Charles Pinckney. Adams, all the Federalists agreed to vote for him, and all but one agreed to vote for Pinckney. And then one would vote for Jay. With the idea being, he'd get them all, and then the vice president would get one less if he got the most votes, and therefore become the vice president. And so that it all worked out. One other person knew, I'm going to vote for Jay, and he voted for John Jay, just to throw away a vote. So they wouldn't have that crisis in 1796. The Republicans did the same thing with Aaron Burr. All but one was supposed to vote for Burr. The problem was, as you can see, nobody knew who that one person was. So they all figured, we better vote for Burr, or someone else must be the one. So they all voted for Burr and all voted for Jefferson. It's a tie. Nobody has the majority, and it goes to the House of Representatives. Did everyone catch that? It goes to the House. In the House, each state gets one vote. So for example, New York has, okay, that's 12 electoral votes. How many members of the House of Representatives does New York have at that time? Did it have? If it has 12 members of the Electoral College. How many members of the House? What's that? 10. So those 10 would have to come together, and whomever they voted for, those 10, the state would get that. So if it went to the House right now, the presidential election, no one got the majority, it would go, let's say it was 269, which could happen. It would go to the House, and Montana's lone member of the House would vote for Montana. And then in New York, California, all 53 would vote. But Burr was on the ticket for the Republicans because he was from New York. And even though he's a pretty controversial governor, he did try to represent the common man, but he didn't agree with all the Republican ideals. But the Federalists didn't trust him either, partially because of his view that common men should have rights. Remember, common meant common birth, not average. Not aristocratic birth, they had regular chins, I guess, but. Want to see it again?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but Burr had this streak where he sometimes would, his ambition would lead him to kind of sway back and forth, and here his ambition got the better of him. He kind of thought, maybe I'm going to be president. That'd be kind of cool. And so instead of backing out and saying the Republican electors wanted Jefferson, he didn't. He let the vote happen. And Federalists were overjoyed. Federalists were like, we could knock out the leader of the Republican Party. That party will go into disarray. And who knows, we might have another Federalist president in 1804. By the way, isn't that really cynical? And that's really cynical because it's clear the electors wanted Jefferson. But when it went to the House, Jefferson won. And the reason why, a few Federalists questioned it. That's why the question mark, see? Do we really want to potentially blow up the Constitution to damage the Republican Party? Especially a fellow New Yorker, to Burr, Alexander Hamilton. The ideological founder of the Federalist Party was literally in exile. Adams hated his guts, but almost everybody hated Hamilton. Once Washington, his kind of protector, was gone, nobody wanted Hamilton in his government. His political career was done. But he still had some influence in New York. And Hamilton didn't trust Jefferson, but despised Burr. Personal dislike. He thought Burr was a scoundrel. But the big thing was Burr believed that the common man should have political power. And so Hamilton threw his support to Jefferson, and enough of that happened that New York voted for Jefferson, and 2 Federalist states left their ballots blank, and allowed Jefferson to win. But the other problem was actually bigger in the long run. Oh, Burr would never forgive Hamilton. And then when Burr, he's going to be the vice president, but he knows the Republicans won't pick him again in 1804. He tries to become governor of New York again, and Hamilton, along with many others, campaigned against him. He didn't win. He's going to hold a grudge against him. This is going someplace. One more thing. Slave power. Slave power was what? Compromise? And that favored the South because it didn't do the taxation. Slaves who aren't citizens, have no rights, can't vote, are at least partially represented, giving the South more members of the House and therefore more electoral votes. And this is the first election where they started calling the 3/5 compromise slave power. Because they looked at it and said this, whites in the South, slave owners in the South have a disproportionate number of votes per free citizen. Now, this is racist when it says the free citizen should only be white. So I'm not denying that. But still, citizens. And the North was furious about this. And that's why they called Jefferson, in the North, they called Jefferson the Negro president. Not because he was doing anything to help the plight of Africans in the United States. No, it was that he was a slave owner. And this cartoon mocks Jefferson, the great philosopher who wrote the Declaration of Independence. Remember, all men created equal, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That's why they call him like a rooster herding slaves. That's why the philosophic cock. And they have him there. And for some reason, cartoons here, they drew Africans, cartoonists, in fact, through much of the 19th century, anybody from Africa or African descent, they drew with a turban. That makes no sense for sub-Saharan Africa, but they did. And so that's why. But, they only had a vague knowledge. And so Jefferson would be ridiculed by this, and this would be personified by, this was whispered in 1800, but would come out in 1804. And would, even though Jefferson would win re-election, it would damage him and slave owners and infuriate them. The issue of him and Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings was his wife's slave. Everyone got that? She was a maidservant. Slave. That was his wife's slave. His wife passed away. Sally Hemings. It was his wife's slaves. It was also his wife's, Sally Hemings was his wife's sister-in-law. So I guess you could say he was Jefferson's half-sister-in-law. Did I say sister-in-law? Act like I never said that. Let's backtrack.
Yeah.
Sally Heming was Jefferson's wife's half-sister. Same father, different mother. Remember the fornication laws? Sally Heming's mother was a what? A slave. The fornication laws, remember what that did is they basically punished the servants or slaves if they said what happened, also made slavery permanent. Well, after Jefferson's wife died and Sally Hemings became his servant, all of a sudden she started having redheaded children. So we know what was going on. And later on, in fact, there was a really cheesy movie made like 12 years ago, something like, I can't remember, something like Forbidden Love, the Sally Hemings story. And it was like, how stupid can you be? I mean, it doesn't matter what, even if she personally did it willingly, which might get a better life, this by definition is rape. She has no consent. There's no power. So she had to do this. And so Jefferson was raping his slave. And this shows you a lot of the contradictions of Jefferson. I'm trying to give you an idea of how this really was a big issue. And this is from 1804, and it showed Virginian luxuries. Jefferson was Virginia. And here is the master. It's, even though it isn't Jefferson, everyone knew it represented Jefferson and the slave, and then the same thing, whipping a slave. And that's what the slave society was. And Southerners were furious. How dare you call us immoral? First up, they said, then what are you for profiting from slavery too? But also, nobody likes to be called out for their immoralities or their little quirks. So what does that sometimes make people do? In fact, a lot of time, become even more, and fight it even harder, double down on it. You look at the history of the politics in the United States, and one of the big things that would help campaigns like Strom Thurmond in 1848, who ran against civil rights, and they called him racist, and that got his crowd fired up. Yeah, how dare you? We'll show you all over the racist. Yeah, this is the U.S. So this is kind of a long history of this. So the age of Jefferson and the revolution of 1800 would come about in this election. Now, the Federalists thought Jefferson will destroy the country, this crazy revolutionary. In fact, Jefferson was so mad, he didn't even show up to his successor's inauguration. Only one president in history, other president in history, didn't show up to his successor's inauguration. And this would, you could imagine what a big deal this would be. I mean, this would be like a shocking story. Anybody know? John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son. Yeah, they had some anger issues in that family. He hated Andrew Jackson. He didn't show up to heck one. And I could almost see that now. And Jefferson, he thought they would change government around, and Republicans called it a revolution. They didn't change the nature of the government. It was more an attitude about common man. That was the big thing. And here is Jefferson acting like a common man. He would ride around Washington, D.C. in commoners, like just average persons, breeches, a name for the pants, kind of a tight pants that they wear. And they'd be ripped, and we could act like, I'm not rich, look at my pants. But it also shows me the contradictions, because he was rich, and he could play act, but it didn't mean what he really was. So let's get to the, real quick to the philosophy. And the philosophy was this. He laid it out in his inauguration. This new ideal what it means to be an American, and so much of it, and so many of the contradictions, have survived to this very day. This idea that this will be the common man. People of regular birth, the people in power do not have to be from a wealthy aristocracy or the rich. They will have power. And therefore, Jeffersonian democracy was the common man. I mean common man, I mean white man. You know, we're talking 1800, right? And remember the term sovereign? I wrote that. That means they have power. But you notice I put Jefferson said this, but it's an illusion. He's not a common man. He's from wealthy birth, and that's personified by this incredible mansion he has in Monticello. Now, how big is that thing? It's an illusion, just like Jefferson's idea of common man. Oh, remember, I'll finish this tomorrow. I know you want to get back to Monticello. Has anyone been there? If you ever get a chance to go to Western Virginia, right near the mountains, it's a beautiful area. The mountains are just right there. They're really pretty. This is cool. They do a good job of it. Tell them I said hi.
The circle, I just usually don't do it. I drive a lot.
So I got a good story about it. You drive a lot?
I get like 15,000 miles a year.
Where do you go? Why do you drive so much?
My parents are 4 miles away.
Where do your parents live?
My mom lives in Glasgow, my dad lives here, and my mom lives in Plentywood, and I go up there a lot. And then I go up there for 2 weeks fishing, and we drive back and forth all the time.
That's a lot of 2-lane road too.
It's a lot of straight for 6 hours.
What's that?
It's a lot of straight for 6 hours in a row.
Yeah, it's not too bad if there's no cars, but you get behind a truck. Oh.
Can you mark this? I'm there.
I think I'm on.
I'm there. My dad was like, till I go to APUSH. She's like, why aren't you at school?
I'm on apps. Everyone came in. I didn't realize.
That's okay.
I'll mark it tardy.
Okay.
I think you were here. Why were you late?
I had to go to the bathroom. I'm sorry. Assassins are weird. Assassins are weird.
All right.
Oh, the kid, okay, so you know the Boston Jeans program? They got killed by a police officer.
Everybody wave to the camera. I'm shutting it off. Wave. No obscene gestures, Tristan. I saw that.
The guy did this is that was murder.